Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer with you guys. I thought I would jump on and have a visual interaction with you guys today. And wanting to just put a little bit of emphasis on the transiting Pluto forming an opposition to transiting Venus, which will take place in a few days. I did a recording yesterday on transiting Venus opposing Saturn, and I thought, well, given Venus is traveling in the sign of Cancer, forming these oppositions to this very, very powerful conjunction that we have activated now and had it last year as well, and we'll have it pretty much, for the next couple of years. It's a very, very powerful conjunction, that Saturn-Pluto. And when we get these faster moving bodies, inner planets, traveling around the chart and then coming to a point where they're either going to form a conjunction, square, or opposition to this Saturn-Pluto, these are really portals, openings, windows of opportunity, which, do bring about crisis, do bring about conflict, but ultimately the conflict or crisis, the tensions that may show up are always an opportunity for your own evolution and growth. For a start, the planet Pluto is ultimately the soul. It is ultimately the planet that induces our evolution and defines our evolutionary path. Before I talk about the Pluto-Venus opposition that will take place in a few days, I just want to just make a few points about Pluto aspecting any planet really, but more specifically the personal planets. Pluto's vibration as representing the soul, when it is forming an aspect to a personal planet in your chart, it is essentially fast-tracking the evolution of your path. So the more planets that are aspected by Pluto, the more intense a person's life will be. However, there is a distinction in the sense of hard aspects and soft aspects. So the hard aspects generally tend to produce a much more intensified life for the person, and that produces what's called cataclysmic events. So what happens is the person goes through these periods in their life. So let's just stick to Venus as an example. If you have a Venus-Pluto aspect in your birth chart, then your whole experience of relationships is extremely intensified and experienced through the vibration of Pluto. So Venus is going to ultimately succumb to what Pluto is intending, which is for the soul to evolve through their relationships this lifetime. Now, if it's a hard aspect, such as the conjunction, square, or opposition, the intensity, the volume of the intensity is quite extreme. And the person goes through these various stages in their life where they have these really intensified cataclysmic crisis situations show up through relationships, and that can mean even losing a partner through death. That's how intense the experiences can be. Certainly being confronted with the deepest components of one's own self in terms of how one relates to themselves, how they understand themselves in terms of their own needs, because Venus does describe our own inner needs and what we need more specifically in relationships. So the intensity gets transferred over to the person that you attract, for instance. So the intensity exists in both people. People who have Venus-Pluto aspects, conjunction, square, or opposition, will almost always attract a partner who reflects that strong, intense, magnetic vibration. So if you have a Venus-Pluto aspect, a hard aspect particularly, there's a very strong magnetic principle to your nature. Remember, Venus is the magnetic principle purely and simply. So Venus, in other words, will show how we attract what we attract in our life, because Venus is the attraction principle and she's magnetic. So when you place her with Pluto, that magnetism is so extremely intensified and more or less defines the relationships, the people that one attracts in their life, and the experiences that you will have. So the hard aspects generally produce these intensified cataclysmic periods in life where, when the person is going through them, this will speak to, by the way, the Venus-Pluto opposition that we have transiting in the heavens today, which is why I'm unpacking it a little bit as well. The hard aspects usually describe intensified cataclysmic experiences in the world of relationships and periods of isolation as well, withdrawing, stepping back, stepping into oneself. But while the person is going through these intense transformations, metamorphosis, and osmosis is another word that's often referred to regarding Pluto's vibration, which basically means, I just made a note of it in case I forgot. Where did I write that? So osmosis is the process of gradual or unconscious assimilation of ideas and knowledge. So another way of saying that would be to say that through the transformative vibration of Pluto, there's a deep desire and evoking, investigating, probing into knowledge, deep knowledge, in order to better understand oneself and one's life and the life of the soul. So when the person who has hard aspects from Pluto to Venus has these really intense, which can be very painful experiences as well in their life, while the person is going through them, it's very, very difficult to understand what is actually happening to you, why this is happening to you, why you're having these intense experiences in relationships that can really show up in a number of different ways. It can be abuse of power. It can be somebody abusing your power, you abusing somebody else's power. It can be manipulative. It can be jealousy. It can be control. All those sorts of lower astral vibrational reflections of the energy of Pluto. But obviously at a higher level, and those lower astral components are necessary. Like them or not, they are necessary experiences, because by experiencing these lower manifestations of this vibration of Pluto, the person gets to experience and understand more of what they need to about themselves and about the whole world of relating and sharing and loving and giving and experiencing. And ultimately, Venus is, whilst it's the magnetic attraction principle, sharing, it's also about how we love ourselves, how we understand our own needs. And if we take it back a step, it's also about, Venus teaches you how to love yourself, how to value yourself. And it is going through, when you have a Venus-Pluto aspect, the deep desire to want to have your needs met through a relationship and through another person is that driving force behind what motivates people to get into these intense relationships and interactions, because the initial feeling or sense is that in order for me to experience this depth and this intensity and these are very intense needs that I have, passions and so forth, I need to meet another person. I need to have another person in my life to experience these things. That's the initial feel of it. But ultimately, it's about learning how to experience those things within one's own self, to be able to discover that depth within your own self. But there's this attraction principle that happens that invites us into the sphere, into the world of another, and we think and feel that that relationship is going to meet those needs and provide those securities and so forth. But the ultimate sense of security and the ultimate sense of feeling valued, it can never come from anybody else, because anybody else who does give that to you can also take it away in the same way that they gave it to you. So the Venus-Pluto people can be very, very suspicious as well of others, because they know that deep down inside they have this consciousness, this awareness. When somebody has a Venus-Pluto aspect in their natal chart, a heart aspect particularly, it is an indication that the soul has been evolving over many, many lifetimes through these sorts of experiences. And the ultimate journey through this evolution is to completely transform the experience of oneself in relation to another and in relationships. And it is also, a Venus-Pluto person is not looking for a shallow, superficial connection. Again, not a judgment. It's just a fact that when somebody has a Pluto-Venus aspect, their interest in other people and in relationships is reflected through a very intense desire to want to know somebody. They attract people who have a lot of depth, who have mystery about them. So the desire is to want to experience these sorts of things, and ultimately it is about evolving through these experiences of power, loss of power, abuse, control. All those things actually start to create this experience of osmosis, which creates a much deeper sense of knowledge within your own self, and it takes you back to who you actually are and what you're actually here to evolve through. But when you are going through these really intense cataclysmic experiences, during those experiences, it's very hard to understand and to connect the dots as to what's actually happening and why. It is usually after the experience has completed that the person, upon reflection and retrospect, may have that insight to be able to understand what's happened and why it has happened. However, on the other hand, when somebody has soft aspects with Venus and Pluto in their natal chart, then it is still a process of an intensified evolutionary, accelerated evolutionary path in their life regarding relationships. But there is more of a consistent flow of this energy taking place that's not cataclysmic. It's still transformative and it's still very much connected to the evolutionary process, but it doesn't spin people out and throw them sideways. It doesn't pull the rug from under their feet. A softer aspect somehow supports the transformational process and evolutionary path in a way that while the person is going through their transformational soul work through relationships, they don't experience this not knowing of what's going on and why. There is a sense of knowing and understanding and integrating it in a way that seems to be a little bit easier than the hard aspects. So the soft and the hard aspects both produce transformation and evolution, but the hard aspects produce cataclysmic cycles in life that can really throw people off balance, but are absolutely crucial to their evolution. The soul has chosen to have those hard aspects. And the soul who chooses to have the softer aspects is choosing not to have these cataclysmic events in the current life, for instance. So that's one difference between the hard aspects and the soft aspects. The other point that I wanted to make as well is in relation to, according to Jeffrey Wolf Green, there are 3 reactions to what's called the evolutionary impulse. And what I'm about to read really pertains to the experience of Pluto and basically how we are evolving and our response or reaction to our evolutionary path. Because Pluto is always the driver, it's the driving force, it's the soul driving everything. But the challenge is always about getting the personality to line up with Pluto and Pluto's desires. And that's often the biggest challenge for the majority of people on the planet to a large degree. And in esoteric astrology, it is the same principle is held and understood. That is that the more we can align the soul and the personality, the more we can have this experience of evolution through a conscious integrated process, which basically means that we have less resistance and a stronger desire to merge the soul and the personality so that they are working together, as opposed to the soul being over here having these intentions and desires, calling the personality, literally calling it, asking it to come closer and closer and closer. But the personality, depending on the individual and where they're at in their level of consciousness and evolution, will either resist the soul's intentions and desires, even though the soul is calling the personality, or will find a way to hear that calling. And that just depends on the individual. It doesn't mean if the personality cannot hear the soul's calling that it's failed necessarily. It just means that the personality in any given life sometimes can be so strong, so powerful in its own sense of importance and specialness and what it thinks it's here to do and achieve, that it just doesn't find the ability to match and to connect with the soul. So then the personality sort of takes over the life and the path of the person. But these are the 3 ways that we generally respond to our evolutionary impulses, which derive from the soul. The first one is to resist the evolutionary karmic requirements altogether, which is what I was just explaining. The second one is to respond wholeheartedly and desire to understand what the lessons are for this life and go for it in a totally non-resistant way. That second point is the minority of people that would approach their evolutionary impulses in that way. The third one, which is the most typical response for people on the planet, is to be willing to change in some ways, yet resist changing other dynamics because of the fear of the unknown. And then he says, so that's the third one. So in the third one, which describes, if I read further, it pretty much just says that the third one is the more typical one that people will embrace. So we'll accept some challenges or transformational processes, and others will just completely deny or reject, right? Essentially. And this principle of the evolutionary impulse and how we respond to it based on these 3 different ways, as I said, connects to any experience of Pluto transits, Pluto aspects in our birth chart and so forth. So it is very interesting at the moment because this Pluto opposite Venus transit in the heavens at the moment is really happening around the lunar eclipse that we've got going. The lunar eclipse is actually today. It's the 16th of July for me today. And the lunar eclipse is at 24 degrees of Capricorn. And which means that Pluto's right there with this eclipse. And Venus, transiting Venus and transiting Pluto, which will oppose each other in a few days, are really in that sphere, the vibration of this eclipse, because the eclipse takes place on the 16th of July, well, in the southern hemisphere. And then a few days later, this Venus transit catches up to forming an exact opposition to Pluto. So that opposition is carrying with it the vibration of the lunar eclipse. So for a start, Venus-Pluto aspects are incredibly powerful, incredibly powerful. They really do change our life. And obviously, the more resistance we have to the vibration, whether it's in our natal chart or whether it's through a transit, the more resistance we have, the more painful the experience is going to be, because Pluto is not a walk in the park. Pluto's vibration doesn't come wrapped up in a gift box of flowers or chocolates. Pluto really demands this experience of feeling vulnerable, feeling powerful as well, feeling powerless. It can be an experience of an ending or a death or a rebirth as well. We can't enter that space of what Pluto is trying to take us into if we have up these resistances and fears of the fears pertain to the unknown. What does that mean? That means that because we want to control our life and an outcome to a situation, we really struggle to step into something that we can't control because we can't see the outcome. And this is what Pluto asks us to do. It's about stepping into that place of the unknown, which will be an experience of power, but until you step into it, you will not experience power. You will have a sense of fear because you can't control the situation or the outcome. So we have to be able to trust, I think, that deeper component of who we are, to trust our higher self, to trust that the letting go of something, truly letting go of something, and the dying of something. We can't step into that zone if we are wanting to control what's going to be, because we don't know what's going to be. That's the bottom line. When Venus is aspecting Pluto, what is happening is there's a process that what Pluto is trying to do is to eliminate all limitations, conditioned limitations that pertain to this life that have been built up over this lifetime and also previous lifetimes too. So it's about transforming all the personal limitations that exist within our own self. That's what Pluto is trying to achieve through his connection with Venus. So it's personal limitations that we experience within our own self, and then the personal limitations that we will project into our relationships as well, onto our partner, and vice versa. It's a reciprocal encounter and experience if you're in a relationship, when you were talking about the experience and vibration of Venus-Pluto, whether it's a natal aspect or whether it's a transit. It's about transforming all blockages, essentially. And it's the drive to want to deeply, deeply, deeply enter into another person's world. See, a Venus-Pluto aspect will always be the person who is not scared of entering these deeper domains, these deeper spheres. of another person's feelings, thoughts, beliefs, fears, all that sort of stuff. Venus-Pluto people have a natural understanding to the psychology of human beings. They step into those worlds very, very naturally. It's a very natural gift, almost, you could say, that these people hold in terms of really understanding the psychology of relationships and how people relate and why they do in the ways that they do. As I said previously, it's a very intense magnetic energy when we're talking about Venus-Pluto. And, Venus-Pluto as well is, because Venus equals sensuality, that literally the sensual experience of our bodies, the experience of touch and affection and things of that nature all connect to Venus. And when you have Pluto there, because of this intense vibration that magnifies that magnetic principle of Venus, then people who have Venus-Pluto aspects are the sort of people that it's like they have magic in their hands, because when they touch another person, the other person feels something that's beyond what would be considered a normal touch to the arm, for instance. And I have to say that this is 100% true. I have a Venus-Pluto opposition in my own chart, so I love talking about Venus-Pluto aspects because I have lived it for many, many years since I was born. I have experienced, and I'm still experiencing, this incredible dynamic force and vibration in my life. And when I do touch somebody in some kind of way, I've always had people say to me that I have this magic in my hands. There's this incredible vibration that comes through my hands when I touch another person that's extremely healing, actually, therapeutic, and extremely sensual as well, if I must say so myself. So anyway, it's just a very interesting aspect from that point of view. Perhaps some of you haven't thought about that. Perhaps you have. Perhaps if you have a Venus-Pluto aspect, you know this about yourself, but you have not necessarily thought about it in this context. And, well, this is the reason why Venus-Pluto have this magic through their sensuality. It's the power to seduce. Seduction is Pluto. If anybody seduces you, they have a very powerful Pluto in their chart. It could be a Sun Pluto, could even be a Scorpio for that matter, because we are talking about the Scorpio energy. Scorpio has enormous ability to seduce people. It's just the nature of that energy. So when a Venus-Pluto experience happens, the drawing in and the attraction of that drawing someone in, it's not a superficial attraction. It's a soul attraction. There's this experience of meeting your soulmate, as it were. Now, soulmate doesn't mean, that you're going to be with this person for your entire life. It can mean that. For some people it is. But I feel that through everything I kind of come across and have come across through the years, sometimes people assume that your soulmate is somebody that once you meet them, you have to be with them forever. It's not necessarily the case, because nothing is permanent. And sometimes it's a case of reuniting with a soul mate or partner where there are certain things that need to be completed. So you reunite with this soulmate in order to complete certain things that were not completed in previous lives. And I say this because often, and this has certainly been the case for me, Venus-Pluto aspects really speak to people who have relationships with people where they have had interactions with that soul in previous lives. So there's this sense of when you meet somebody, you know them. You already know them before your mind starts to get to know them, before you get to start to spend time with them. There's a sense of recognition, right? The soul recognizes the other soul, and that's that's always the experience with a Venus-Pluto aspect. Now, sometimes that can be a beautiful, magical, alluring, mystical, um, passionate encounter, exchange, experience. And then other times it can be that, but it can actually turn into something that can be quite dark and quite abusive and extremely intense and painful as well. And I have to say I've had all of that throughout my life in my relationships. Um, I can think of one, two, well, probably every single main relationship I've had, long-term relationships. I know that I've had previous lives with every single one of those people. And I even know the details of the past lives that I've had with these people. That is the roles that we played, the experiences that we had, and why we actually came back together this lifetime. Now, in some cases, I was able to work this out while I was even in the relationship, and in other cases, I didn't really work it out until the relationship had come to an end. So that's a Venus-Pluto experience. Okay, what I would like to do is bring up the current transits, because I found something else that's really interesting with this transiting Pluto opposite Venus. So this is today's chart, and you can see here that, this chart was done for 2:28 p.m. in Melbourne, and the moon is not full yet. It's still about 8 degrees or so away from being opposite the sun. So that's the lunar eclipse that we're having today and tomorrow. And here's the Venus approaching the opposition to Saturn. And I'll just animate this chart and show you when Venus gets close enough to being opposite Pluto. So let's just step it forward. I would say from about here, you could even go a day before this, really. But let's just say from the 18th of July, you can see Venus has reached, well, she's almost 18 degrees actually, because she's 17 degrees and 50 minutes of Cancer. And Pluto is 21 degrees, 48 minutes of Capricorn and retrograde. So starting from the 18th of July, stepping forward another day, 19th of July, she gets to 19, so she's getting real close now. 20th of July, she's at 20, so she's super close. And 21st of July, she's almost exactly opposite. We'd need to adjust that by a little bit in order to get it exact, but look, let's not get too technical. That's good enough. That's her being opposite Pluto. So when did we start? And then we started on the 18th, was it? Yeah. So from the 18th of July until the 21st of July, we are pretty much experiencing this opposition of Venus-Pluto. Now, I think this opposition is extremely powerful, mainly because she starts to form this opposition really only a couple of days after the lunar eclipse. So that vibration of the eclipse is well and truly surrounding this opposition between Venus and Pluto. Now, Venus and Pluto alone, this transit alone, is not enough to necessarily indicate the biggest transformation of your life, or the death of somebody close, or the ending of a relationship, although it could be any of those things. But as I've said previously, when you have a massive critical event take place, it's not reflected through just one transit in the heavens, and particularly a quick transit like this, which is just 3 days or so. But if we just look at this aspect alone, we understand that before Venus got to opposing Pluto, she was opposite Saturn. So she's being hammered. If I'm going to be perfectly honest, she's being really hammered by some really hardcore energies, Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn. Venus in Cancer is a very, very sensitive Venus. So the issues that are going to come up for people definitely do pertain to long-term resistances that we've had about certain things that we've needed to confront within our own self, about self-love, self-worth, self-value, and also how we love and value another as well. So any resistances and limitations that exist within us, which we all have, this transit really speaks to those matters. And those matters are not just things that, it's not something that was developed a week ago. These are usually very entrenched patterns in our psyche and in our long-term memory that can pertain to this life and previous lives. So a transit like this comes along and it essentially stimulates or triggers or uncovers these types of issues or limitations or patterns of behavior that are not essentially conducive to our evolutionary growth. So through Saturn, there was the experience of some hard lessons there that needed to be confronted. And with Pluto, it's truly the experience of, I want to put it in a soft way if I can, but it's hard because Pluto is not soft. Pluto is extremely intense. So look, one way of understanding this would be people who are in relationships where things have been hidden, for example. Where there's been strong desires to want to remove certain obstacles or certain things out of a relationship, and there's been enormous struggle around that. Well, this opposition is going to highlight these things because, first of all, Pluto connects to what's hidden, you see. So the hidden components, which relates to our shadow, the unconscious, are not necessarily things that we are aware of. That's one thing. It can also be things that people consciously hide. Because Pluto connects to things that are hidden, it exposes what's been hidden, right? So it brings it up for the person to see, or for the relationship to see, or for anybody else for that matter. So it can be hidden components being brought up to the surface. It can be a past relationship or past lover that comes back into your life as well, because Pluto is connected to what disappears and reappears. And that this has happened to me in my own life under Venus-Pluto transits, by the way. I've had an experience with somebody 20 years ago, and then they came back into my life, 20 years later, whatever. So I've had that experience. It's quite interesting. The other thing that I want to mention about this is not going to be an easy few days, by the way. It's going to bring up some really intense, conflicting issues in people's relationships. And it can be a source of tremendous transformation if both people are not resistant to this vibration. If one or both people are resistant, then obviously what's going to result is conflict and drama, intensity, very intense conflict and drama. and it can be the ending of things as well for some people. And obviously, when if a connection is coming to an end, that's not something that's a couple or a person decides overnight, right? That's a process that usually unfolds over, a certain amount of time. But a transit like this comes along, and it's just the catalyst for what needs to happen next in terms of, are we evolving, transforming through these issues consciously together, or are we ready to depart and just go in our separate sort of directions? Sometimes as well, what happens with Venus-Pluto aspects is that one person wants to leave the relationship and the other person doesn't, and the intensity of how both people feel is really extreme. So the one that wants to leave is they just absolutely do not want to remain for even just one more second in this relationship, and the other person feels the same thing but on the opposite level. So you can imagine the tension and the conflict that arises out of these completely opposite spaces that people are standing in. That's frequent. That's a frequent encounter with Venus-Pluto transits. It's not. That's more typical than both people actually wanting to part in their own ways. I just want to let me just find something. If my mouse can get it together. What did I do with? Just bear with me, guys. Just want to give you a couple of key words that you can take with you to understand oppositions in general. Now, oppositions in general are ultimately about, I don't really want that there, so I'll just move it. Oppositions are about awareness, crystallization, but the awareness doesn't come initially, okay, because oppositions are essentially energies where, so with this Venus-Pluto, for example, in a relationship, one person will be the Pluto, the other person will be the Venus. So the energy, with an opposition, the energy is always polarized. So let me just open something up here. So the opposition is the second most powerful aspect out of all the aspects. The first one is the conjunction. The opposition is the second most strongest. Now, it's polarity and strife between two opposing factors or forces. Conflict between the inner and what appears to be an outer issue. But the issue that appears to be outside of yourself is actually not at all the case. But what's happened is, with an opposition, you project the energy onto an environment, a person, etc. So the issue is polarized outside of yourself, and you think it's the other person that's presenting this problem to you, that's opposing you. But the ultimate lesson with oppositions is to understand that that energy is your own, and all you've done is projected it out there. So until you are able to synthesize the polarization of these two vibrations, these two energies, it will feel like a force outside of you coming against you, towards you in a way that's oppositional, right? It's easier to achieve a sense of equilibrium with oppositions, more so than it is with squares. Squares are a lot more difficult to get that sense of equilibrium within. The opposition is an aspect that can be self-blocking and produce a lot of dynamic, polarized energies, but they can be synthesized. But the initial experience is it's them versus me, or it's him versus me, or it's her versus me, right? So it's the projection, it's polarized energy. You need to understand this because this point applies to any opposition that you look at in the chart. So, for example, with the chart that we're looking at here, for people who are faced with certain situations in their life right now, this opposition that comes up between Venus and Pluto over the next few days can be the experience of couples having really intense oppositional places or spaces within the relationship. So it can feel like a force of, someone being against you, as it were, but it's the vibration is within your own self, but it's the opposition means that you project it onto another. Naturally, that's going to connect to a number of different issues that are going on within the relationship. But the thing to understand is when you have projected something onto somebody else, first of all, that is an important thing to do. I know that might sound weird, but it is important because when you have projected something, you're actually able to see it in a different way, right? Because before it's projected onto another, it's actually lying unconsciously dormant within you. So you're not aware of it, which is why it gets projected onto another. And it's not until this uh, quality or behavior, it's not until it's projected onto another person that you're able to start to understand it. First of all, you understand it through seeing it in another, and it may repulse you or it may attract you depending on what it is you are projecting. But ultimately, it's about being able to see that and synthesize it back into your own self in a healthy, functional way that can help you become more conscious and more aware. That's what oppositions fundamentally do. They create incredible awareness. People who don't have a lot of oppositions in their chart have an incredibly subjective nature, very self-orientated, very difficult to be objective and see the other side to a person or a situation or conditions and so forth, because they're just so subjected in their own field of experience, their own subjective nature and desires and thoughts. And that's the beginning signs of the zodiac. They're all very, very subjective. This is why the opposition is the same as the archetype of Libra, right? So when you understand Libra, you understand that the aspect opposition is exactly that. What does Libra do? It gives you a mirror through another person. When you enter into a relationship, it is like entering a space where you look into a mirror and you can see components of yourself. Can you see your forehead if you are not looking into a mirror? You can't, right? This is why when you look into a mirror and you see your forehead, that's the Libran experience, basically. That's the Libran being a mirror to you of components of your own self. And the opposition pretty much acts in the same way. We need to project that energy onto somebody else to see it in order to be able to make sense of it. And hopefully with awareness and experience and understanding, we actually reintegrate it back into ourselves, synthesize it in a healthy way. So these transits, when you see these transits forming these oppositions, they bring up these polarized standpoints or views or positions that people take in a relationship. And it can be, because it's oppositional means I'm opposing you. There's the initial experience is a conflict, right? It's I've got to beat you, or I've got to be better than you, or whatever. That's very ego based, obviously, but sometimes it is necessary for these polarized positions to come up so that people can actually become more aware of their own self, of certain behaviors that belong to shadow stuff. So these oppositional aspects, whilst they can produce a lot of conflict and tension, they're incredibly dynamic and can result in illumination, crystallization, and awareness. The other thing that I want to point to about this transit between Venus and Pluto, I want to bring in one of the asteroids. Just realized a couple of days ago that the asteroid Isis, asteroid number 42, goddess Isis, who's a very strong, figure in Egyptian mythology and history and so forth. And so she's a divine feminine figure, a divine mother. She has a 3-year cycle, and so she doesn't move very, very quickly. Not and certainly not super slow either. But it's a significant cycle. It's a 3-year cycle, and at the moment, she's forming actually a opposition to this full moon eclipse that we have, because at the moment she's at 22 degrees of Cancer, so she's right opposite this full moon. And in terms of the opposition with Pluto and Venus, the goddess Isis, the asteroid Isis, is right there conjunct Venus, opposite Pluto, which I think is really fascinating, actually, because, I mean, in short, her myth is quite fascinating. But in short, what she did was she put together what was it? The god Osiris was basically torn to pieces by his brother, literally torn to pieces. And it was Isis that actually put him back together and brought him back to life. So she represents things that connect to unifying, reunifying, reconstructing, reconciling, synthesizing, blending, putting two and two together. Now you've got to understand that this is all to an extent fairly symbolic. So her presence with Pluto and Venus during this transit is interesting, because I said a moment ago that Pluto represents things that reappear, right? Or disappear, for that matter. So goddess Isis being conjunct this Venus, she's going to bring the energy and vibration of elements that can be reunified in relationships, but there's something pretty intense that would have had to have been accumulating and taking place. The putting something together is a really intense process. It's when you're putting something together to this level of intensity, then what contributed to its destruction was not an easy experience, is what I'm trying to say. On the other hand, it can also be issues pertaining to, because she represents, I really like that line, putting two and two together. So it might be for people through these few days with Venus opposite Pluto that there's an opportunity to put two and two together when it comes to your relationship, right? And when it comes to financial matters, we can extend it to that as well. But it could be the discovery or the uncovering of something that's so crucial to help you put some pieces back together in terms of it could be, information. It could be, pieces of the puzzle that have been missing in relation to your connection with another person. So if somebody's been hiding something from you, for instance, this is going to be a powerful process of putting all the pieces of the puzzle together, right? So it's a very powerful vibration and energy. Just a couple of more keywords about the goddess Isis. So let's see. A need to bring together scattered parts, seeing the whole in the sum of all parts. Magical knowledge, undying love and faithfulness. And she also is a reflection of the perfect wife and dedicated mother as well. So it's a very strong feminine archetype, divine feminine principle, but her magical powers can connect to death and rebirth, the divine mother, but also it's about being able to pull things apart, as it were, and reassemble them all together in order to get a holistic view and picture of what it is you're trying to understand. In this case, she's right there with Venus-Pluto, so it has to do with your relationship. So consider that, over the next few days, how she might be showing up for you in your experience of your relationship. And also, if you're not in a relationship, then this vibration, I think, can be very powerful in putting pieces together, perhaps, that are fragmented, perhaps components of your own self relating to your own self-worth and value and your own journey in that, because we are all going through some kind of evolutionary path and journey in experiencing, understanding self-worth, self-love, self-value. And naturally, that's always going to be mirrored and reflected through the archetype of Venus. But whatever aspect she has to your chart, wherever she's located in your chart, will speak to this journey of self-love, which is, in my opinion, it's the most important journey towards our evolutionary growth and development, because the bottom line is that if we can't love ourselves, we absolutely cannot love another. Some people might like to argue with that, and people might like to say, well, I don't feel that kind of self-love so much for myself, but I really love my daughter, or I really love my dog, or whatever. But the truth is, at the core, we can't really love another until we really love ourselves. And this is the principle of Venus. This is what she helps us learn about ourselves. So these issues of love, self-worth, self-esteem, how you are relating in relationships, how you are understanding the needs of another person, how you are understanding your own needs, these are all the issues that are going to come up. And Goddess Isis, being connected to this opposition between Venus and Pluto, will be the divine feminine principle that will assist you in putting the puzzle together, perhaps on material that you've been working with for quite some time. So just be very receptive and open to her vibration, because she can bring this gift of seeing the sum whole, the holistic view to perhaps a current situation you're in a current relationship, or, as I said, and it can be or in addition to your own personal journey of self-love, self-worth, and self-value, which is so crucial, because again, that comes back to the shadow that's projected onto the world. I'll just stop sharing my screen for now, as I'm really coming up to the end of this video. It just comes back to the shadow, dark stuff that we see out there in the world are our own projections. Ultimately, that's what they are. So until we can heal and integrate the shadow with our soul, we can't heal the world. So we always have to bring it back to our own self. It's about healing your heart, your soul. It's about loving yourself. It's about loving your journey. It's about showing up in your journey with care and love, about who you are and about how your life is changing and evolving and how you are growing. It's not about focusing anger out there or being pissed off at this system, that system, or what that person did or what that person said. It's that is just a constant resistance to looking at our own stuff. So the resistance projects it out there. And as long as we keep doing that, we will forever continue to see the shadow projected out into the world, and consequently see these behaviors that are very dark and dysfunctional. So this is why Venus she's so prominent in that sphere of our journey. If we cannot love ourselves, we cannot love anything else or anybody else. So how can we project love out there? Very important message. And this Venus-Pluto opposition transit that's happening in the heavens is going to stir these issues up, but from the deepest levels. It's not about and Venus is in Cancer, so there's a lot of emotion, deep emotion and deep insecurities that will be stirred up. Because remember, when it comes to these aspects, in this case an opposition, Venus is not going to tell Pluto what she wants out of this experience in this opposition. She literally has to bow down to Pluto. She has to embrace what Pluto is bringing into her experience of evolution. And the experience, as I said before, it's not a walk in the park. It's really about facing these deeper resistances and fears that we have of the unknown within our own self and our own life, in terms of where we are progressing and how we are evolving and developing. So it's a really intense aspect. And if it does bring up some pretty intense experiences for you, then that would just, to me, that would say that, you know, clearly there's ongoing things perhaps that have been going on for some time in your relationship or in your life. Nothing happens overnight. Nothing. So these sorts of quick transits are just they're the catalyst for these bigger transformational experiences that come along. They can be transformational or they can be really painful, or both. It just depends on our own resistance or our own ability to show up, step in, and feel what's going on. We have to feel it. So I'll leave it there, and hopefully this was useful information, and feel free to leave any comments or questions below. As always, I love hearing your feedback. I try very hard to respond to all of you. Thanks for taking the time to watch and listen, and thanks to all new subscribers again, and all the previous subscribers that have been with me for quite some time. I'm really, really busy at the moment with my schedule. I'm kind of struggling to catch up with all my work, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. So if you do contact me for a reading, just keep in mind that I'm quite busy at the moment. That doesn't mean that I can't book you in, but there's a bit of a wait time. But if you're happy to wait, then please contact me. And also, just if you want to know a little bit more about what sort of readings I do and so forth, just drop me an email. My information is going to be below this video. So happy lunar eclipse, and just keep in mind that the next few days are very intense vibrations. We've got the lunar eclipse, we've got Saturn opposite Venus, and then we've got Pluto opposite Venus. So this is deep, deep, deep matters that are very personal to us, that really relate to our own self-worth, that will come up and be very confronting. So just be aware of these oppositions being factors that project and polarize energies. So again, just try to step back and try to gain some awareness and clarity and objectivity on any situation you are in, as best as you can anyway, without going into severe conflict and drama, because that's always quite hurtful for both parties concerned. Okay, back to my work now. So I'll see you guys very soon. Much love and blessings, and thanks again. Bye.